Welcome to the latest in the Disrupted series. I'm joined here today by Howard Edelstein. Howard's actually last year was appointed as the CEO of BioCatch. I knew Howard when he was just plain old Howard, but I thought we'd just get in a bit of a dialogue about actually the space of biometrics, which obviously BioCatch is about. But tell me, what made you take the job at BioCatch?
That's a good question. So the last bunch of years since I stopped operating about 4 years ago, I've been doing investing in early stage companies and working with some of the private equity guys on larger scale deals. And I just found the earlier stage innovative companies to be brain enlightening. After 30 years in the business, and no, I'm not old.
Young Howard.
After 30 years in the business, you find the next generation of kids. Kids are defined as really smart, PhDs, under 30, do all kinds of interesting things, to be just mentally stimulating. And so we try to take the age thing and turn it into an experience thing and try to help them. So that's how I found BioCatch, and it's a pretty cool place.
Yeah, no, good. So, and we obviously have done a little bit of work, and we'll come to that a little bit later. But tell us about BioCatch. What's actually your business? What do you do?
So BioCatch was started by a bunch of guys, one in particular who I met back in 2013-14, and he tried to tell me that based on your behavior, and in this case behavior is defined as how you interact with a machine, how you type, move the mouse, keyboard, how you hold your phone, scratch on, etc., you can actually profile an individual. And my basic reaction being from New York was, not so much. So I got to know him a little bit, and he came out of the military intelligence, the Signal Intelligence Corps, and they were using those kinds of techniques to basically track bad guys around the world. So I said, okay, show me. And in the meantime, and in parallel, he was talking to this bank, what was it called, RB something or another. S, that's what it was, RBS.
Yeah.
And I gave you a call.
Yeah,
and said, does this stuff really work or not? Because there's only a couple of you guys out there trying it. Anyway, one thing led to another, and it's pretty addictive technology, and it's a pretty addictive company, and the people are pretty addictive. So once you get into it and you see what it can do, you go, holy moly, this is really cool. We should be able to make a business out of this.
No, and I'd like to hear a little bit more about some of those things, but just the big topic of biometrics, behavioral biometrics, just maybe explain some of that to us.
Right, so biometrics is a big field, face, retinas, fingerprints, all that kind of stuff. And the interesting thing about almost all of them is they're very deterministic, they're very discrete. I mean, if you have your fingerprint stolen, what are you going to do kind of thing, right? Behavior is not deterministic, it's probabilistic. It changes. Your behavior changes as you grow, as you do different things. So how you interact with a machine really depends on what you see on the machine. So the notion that you can model an individual based on those preferences, I'll give you an example. Do you know how to cross your arms? Now cross them the other way. You had to think about it.
Yeah. Did I do it? I don't even know what I did.
Yeah. Well, that kind of goes to the core of it. You have a lot of preferences, physiological preferences, how you walk. People recognize you by your gait in the street, how you cross your arms, etc. If I told you have the same kinds of preferences at a micro level with how you use a keyboard or a mouse or display or hold your phone, which muscles in your hand you use, how you scrolling pattern, you'd say, really, you're consistent. Your behavior is a reflection of who you are, and different than a fingerprint or a facial rec or whatever. It actually morphs with you. So by using machine learning, once you lock on to someone and learn about them, it's really hard for someone else to use your behavior. So basically the fundamental use case of the company and what behavior is good for is authenticating you against your credentials. So that you log on to a computer to your bank, such as RBS, you stand up, someone sits down. Within 4 or 5 seconds, the bank knows it's not you any longer. It might even know who it is. And the beauty of it is it's odorless, frictionless, colorless, So you're being modeled and tracked through a session, which is pretty cool. You're not fingerprinting someone every 5 seconds or anything like that.
So one of the things that we talked about, I remember initially, was it was harder to determine it was precisely you, but it was very easy to determine it wasn't you, right? So I think things have moved on a little bit from that. But how many factors does it take to uniquely identify an individual, to say that's absolutely Simon McNamara?
Well, We don't do identity per se, which is your question, right? We do identity proofing, and we currently measure a couple thousand factors, okay? And it turns out that any single individual has probably between 50 and 100 that are very strong to them. So basically, it's your data. Basically, you're reduced to data, okay? And it's really interesting data because of those 50 or 100 that are strong to you, they are very valid to basically authenticate you against credentials or identity of some sort. But also, you can separate that person from the population. And then one of the things we've done with, obviously, RBS and some of the other financial institutions is you can actually then use those in a broader population experiment to extract other kinds of knowledge. So, for example, the traditional use case in the core of the business is still identifying you against your credentials and authentication. However, we also have use cases where people open up new accounts. And here it gets really crazy, and it's only because we have 8 billion transactions, 100 million profiles. Client comes to us and says, how do I know who's opening this credit card? Is it Simon opening up a credit card account with Simon's identity? Or has Howard bought Simon's identity for $2.50 and he's opening up a credit card? And without having Simon's profile or knowing, how do you know that? Well, it turns out that your identity is known to you in a fundamentally different way than anyone else. So I could buy every piece of identity that you have, your ID numbers, your driver's license, etc. However, how I use them is different. So, for example, if you're in the States, Social Security number is a perfect example. You have a 9-digit number. Any American you ask will give you 3 digits, 2 digits, 4 digits. It takes about a second and a quarter, fluidly. You ask someone whose Social Security number he just bought, he's not going to have 9 digits in the short-term memory. He'll barely have 4 or 5 or 6. It changes the behavior. So basically, how you know your behavior comes out in the way you use your fingers. How I know it comes out in the way I know it, and we know it differently. That helps us actually identity proof before we even authenticate to know whether Simon's using his identity or not. It's kind of not
No,
easy.
neat. So what is the defense against ultimately my identity from a behavioral biometric perspective being stolen?
Right. But at the moment, you don't even know what your behavior is, right? You can't describe or model or have any knowledge of how do you describe your gait when you're walking down the street? Someone may recognize you because they know you, but you don't know what your gait looks like, and you don't know how to describe it to anyone. You don't say, I kind of tilt to the left and limp or something, right?
No.
So behavior is actually a really, really interesting thing, at least for the next several years, where even if you were to copy it, the best you could do is replay it. Because it's manifested itself with keystrokes and mouse and phone and vibrations and what have you. But even doing that is not so trivial. So actually replicating it is not easy at all. Now, anticipating that someday there'll be Uber machines and quantum whatever's and it'll be a lot easier somehow maybe to do, or at least the modeling of it will be more effective. We already recognize this as a game of chasing crime. You don't stop crime, you fight crime. You have to continue to do it. So one of the things BioCatch does, again invented by our founder and his gang, is that we have everything we do is really very passive, okay? We monitor what you're doing and we build a profile. However, there are things that we can do to test. For example, when the cursor disappears, what do? You shake your mouse.
Yeah.
Okay, and then usually you curse Microsoft around the same time. Okay?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be Microsoft though.
Often it's my eyesight now that's failing, and therefore it's actually there. But go on. Yeah.
Right, but if you think about it, sometimes when we're not sure, you can make the cursor vanish and see how you shake. Because you don't know how you shake, but we know how you shake.
Right.
And it's not something you can actually model easily because you don't do it all the time because it's not there. So we call those invisible challenges, and we have a huge library of them. Only several are actually in use. The rest are anticipating that years down the road, as people get more sophisticated by using machine learning and AI to try and replicate people, how you actually have modeled somebody's behavior and then they're trying to copy it. Well, they can only copy what they've seen. They can't copy what they've not seen, even if they get to be able to copy it. So what I'm trying to say is data is a couple things. First of all, like a fingerprint or a biometric of some sort, it's a signal. However, it's more than a signal. It's and I hate to be philosophical, it's only a view into your soul. Because over time, just like we screen new credit card applications, you can actually learn more about someone over time. Okay, and that data itself is rich. No one has correlated that data to anything. So if you look at your identity today, it consists of overlaying your passport, your driver's license, your credit cards. They may or may not even have the same exact name on them, but that's your identity. And almost all data is correlated. If you look at the things that are being used to detect bad behavior or bad incidents or fraud or whatever, it's finding stuff that you don't know about, like transactions you did, are they familiar to you or not? Behavior has a whole different characteristic to it because now we have 8 billion transactions, 100 million behavioral profiles, including RBS's clients, okay? When someone comes to us with a problem to solve, we can go through that data, find the signals in that data that are minuscule, probably worthless on their own, but with machine learning, go through vast amounts of it and come out with 30 or 50 or 100 signals. When you tie it together, all of a sudden it has some meaning. And I'll give you the perfect example. Vishing in the UK, authorized push payments, a big deal. And the banks, including RBS and your fellow banks, it's really hard to detect that a legitimate client's going into a legitimate account and giving away their assets. But they're being coerced by someone or induced by someone or socially engineered.
Changes in that circumstance.
Well, your behavior changes.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, it's logical because when you're working, you have a certain degree of purposefulness and focus, right? Now someone's giving you instructions in your ear. It's no longer parallel processing. Your brain's parallel processing. You're now getting serial data. You're getting a number one digit at a time. You're getting a name. And you know what? What do you think? Your behavior's not going to change. You don't wait to hear 20 digits before you start typing. So this is where it's a brand new use case. We had no idea that in the data we already had for the last 4 years, there were all these signals hiding, waiting for someone to say, can you solve this problem? And that gives it fundamentally more power than a single modality or a single signal. I'll give you another one. We have a client who is a credit card issuer, a very big one in the U.S., and they had an issue they wanted to explore with elder fraud. And the typical elder fraud case is you have a 60, not that anybody's near 60,
No.
but 60-year-old card holder with an 18-year-old using the card online and a card not present transaction. So you say, well, how can I find out the guy's age? Well, you could ask him, but he's probably not going to tell you, right? So we worked with them, and we basically have determined that, looking through this huge database of ours, with their data, that we now, within 2-3 years, we can determine the age of someone in a card not present transaction by how they operate online. And it's kind of funny, but if you think about it, look at the way your kids work online, look at the way you work online, right? Now the trick is to calibrate it. And one of the calibrations, which will make you feel very sad, I don't mean to do that, is that you know how you move the cursor and land on a box and you push click?
Yes.
The time it takes you to push click from when you land, every year you age, adds around 35 milliseconds to the click time.
Right.
No one thought of looking at that stuff before.
So that's a profile for an individual through time and so on, right? But there must be some sort of overlap. I mean, there are clearly 65-year-olds that are more like a 15-year-old in terms of their behavioural, and there are some 15-year-olds that, so what
but
I'm
there's
saying.
still a big gap.
I guess at the end of the day, you've got some idea where people sit. But I'm just interested that there is that discrete, because the whole population doesn't move as one, right?
Yeah, there's no doubt.
There are only 7 billion people on the planet, so,
Right. So and that's the point. The good news, bad news about behavior is it's not deterministic, such as a fingerprint or a scan or whatever, but it is probabilistic. So you cannot identify someone the same way, at least not today, okay? But because of that negative quality, it actually gives you the ability not to be able to spoof it, not to be able to steal it, not to be able to do it, and also study it in retrospect and regress against it to figure out new things. So you're right, you can't tell exactly when someone was born, but you can. When you look at the data, you have from a probabilistic.
And you've got to get the other pieces.
Exactly. So then you look at 23, 4, 50 other data points, and you have a probabilistic view that is virtually unspoofable, not perfect, but what's perfect in this world? Seriously, you have a perfect fingerprint, but it's digital. It goes away. Someone steals it, you're toast. This gives you a different kind of benefit.
Yeah, I find it fascinating actually, just in terms of, and I'm talking about the next iteration of this, and there's plenty of mileage in here, but there is a world out there potentially where my computer talks to your computer, right? So, do you guys give much thought into that space, or you just, you're going to be bust at that point? And,
well, I don't think we'll be bust, but assuming we get to that age, because we're all youngsters here, we right now are focused on a domain that is still in its early days. And so I can't actually say that we've given a whole lot of thought to more than a few years out, right? Because if you look at the problem that we're trying to solve today, and you look at every few months having another, what was, Arthur Clarke had his third law, that any advanced technology, you would not, any sufficiently advanced technology is really hard to distinguish against magic or science fiction. So when you look at some of the stuff we're doing, a lot of financial institutions, credit to RBS here, look at it as science fiction or magic today. Not everyone's using it. So the fact that you took science fiction and actually implemented it in a way that protects your clients and their assets is pretty cool. You've still got a long way to run just to get, I ask myself, with an ROI that is so high today, with this basic technology, why doesn't everybody use it? Because they're still, their mindset is stuck in last year's stuff where they're adding more deterministic things. There's a really interesting book that a guy turned me on to called How to Measure Anything. And it goes through the whole notion of people measure things based on doing deterministic things. The whole notion of authentication, the whole notion of security is about solving a problem deterministically. You need to be absolutely certain you solved it. But if you look at real intelligence gathering, it's really much more probabilistic because anybody who's deterministic is going to get around, be able to be gotten around. So the book actually talks about when you measure things, you should be measured stochastically or probabilistically, so you actually have a better chance of capturing the whole thing. And I think behavior is going to be around for a long time in different modes of operation.
Now, I love your examples, right? So there are always little nuggets and always things. Now, you can tell us the dead man story.
Oh my goodness. The dead man story is just off the charts, and it's one of the things that I say, as valuable and important as BioCatch becomes, I get the book rights. And I'm going to do a movie, because it's really cool. So there's a large credit card issuer, true story, and we screen do credit card applications, as we talked about. And we always check the data, make sure the models are better and this and that. And in this world, there was an example of us approving a credit card or suggesting the approval of a credit card based on the behavior of the individual through the entire application. And you got to remember there are a lot of things you fill out. The credit card company on this particular case said, no, we're declining the application, it's fraud, sorry. So in the reconciliation of why we had a different view than they did, because they use a deterministic methodology and we use a probabilistic methodology, the kids went through it. The kids of the 30-year-olds were really smart. They went through it and they said, whoever filled out this application has got to be the guy because his identity is so well known and there is not a single mistake anywhere. And remember, we don't see the PII, we don't see it, we just see the behavior around the PII. So we went back to the credit card issuer and said, look, you better check because we don't understand why you turned this guy down for fraud because this guy looks like he's the guy. And the true story, credit card company said, and this was many iterations, but the short form is, tell the kids, they used other words, tell the kids the guy's dead. He could not have filled out the application. Well, I'm from New York, and kind of dead is like a binary event, and so you go tell the kids. Now, exactly. Okay, but here's the beauty about the kids. They're young, they're smart, and they don't just take the fact that you're dead at face value. So they go back and look at the data, the behavioral data, and the behavioral data says there's no effing way this guy's dead. No one who's dead. No one could do that, and no one could have taken that identity and behaved that way filling out the application. So we went back to the credit card company. This was a ping pong. But this is only chapter 3 because this book is a book in itself. Anyway, long story short, we asked them to check. Now think about this. You're going to a really large credit card company issuer and say, can you please check if the guy's dead? And the natural response is, are you effing kidding me? What am I going to do with that? Anyway, after lots of pleading, saying on behalf of the kids, they called the guy, which is one way to check. But the problem was somebody answering the phone, purporting to be that guy, answered the phone, and now it became a whole different issue. Not only was there someone maybe trying to get a credit card for the different identity, there may be somebody impersonating somebody altogether. This then turned into a whole hoo-ha. And the short answer was, it turns out the guy was not dead. And this, of course, was like...
It was a relief for him.
A relief for him, and a relief for a lot of people, but it caused a lot of consternation as to how a computer determined he was dead. And it turns out it's actually really simple. A legitimate guy applying for a legitimate credit card in a legitimate way was filling out his application, and he fat-thumbed one digit on his Social Security number. And that Social Security number, that 9 transposed with 0, was that of a dead individual. So the computer picked it up as a dead social security number and didn't look any further. We don't look at socials and we don't look at PII, we look at the behavior of the application. So needless to say, this was a real story. Now, fast forward 9 months, this is really true. So we were asked to present to a larger group of the executives in this very nice company. And after one of these fireside chats, somebody asked the question, what is your business model? Now, a lot of people heard the day-to-day story, but I was about to answer, and somebody who knows us, executive at the company, said, Howard, do you mind if I take that question? And I said, please, it's your house, it's your building, it's a lovely place, but whatever you want. So he said, let me just tell you what their business model is. They use behavior, they go to cemeteries, they resurrect dead guys, we give them credit cards, we make a lot of money. And I thought that was a better answer than I could come up with.
So thanks, Howard. I mean, that's fascinating. And as you just heard, that's probably all we've got time for now, but behavioural biometrics is a fascinating subject, and you had a little bit here. There'll be more available on the Disrupted Hub, so I suggest you go and look there. And actually, there's plenty more out there in the wide web, as we say. So with that, thanks for your time, thanks for your attention today. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and go find out more. Bye for now.